Thanks, Peter. It's my pleasure to be part of the Switzer Small and Microcap Conference. I'm Bob Proulx, CEO of Imagion Biosystems. Imagion is an Australian ASX listed company, medical device company, developing a new imaging technology. Our proprietary imaging technology is patent protected, and our underlying nanoparticle technology has broad commercial applicability. I don't think anybody's unaware of the fact that cancer is a global health problem. More than 1 in 3 people are affected by cancer. We spend over $100 billion a year annually on a global basis to try to diagnose cancer, and yet it's clear that we're not doing a very good job of that. Why is that? Well, today we have 5 basic ways to image the body: X-ray, ultrasound, MRI, CT, and PET. And the problem is that while each of these techniques is very good at being able to do various forms of imaging, anatomical features, tissue, being able to differentiate different types of tissue, none of them can tell you definitively if what they see is actually, for example, a malignant form of cancer or a tumor. They can tell you that there's a region of interest or a suspicious lesion, but they can't actually tell you if what they see is in fact cancer. So at Imagion Biosystems, we're developing a new 6th way to detect cancer, one that doesn't use radioactivity, but instead uses biosafe magnetic nanoparticles to tag the cancer cells, and a proprietary detection platform that's able to have high sensitivity for detecting those particles if they become bound to the target tissue. It's this combination of a proprietary sensitive magnetic sensor along with these targetable magnetic particles that was identified by the FDA as being a breakthrough device, and is what we're developing as our first commercial product. What does that really mean, having a new 6th way to image the body, mean from the perspective of outcomes for patients? So the statistics are very clear. If you catch cancer early, you have a very high probability of having a successful outcome in curing the patient. But if we catch cancer late, which is too often the case, our treatment options become more restricted and survival rates fall off. And why is that? Well, the problem is that our current imaging techniques don't detect cancer at an early enough stage. They require a fairly large mass of tissue before they're able to see the suspicious lesion or the region of interest. There are techniques such as PET, which can be more sensitive, but now the problem is that a PET requires the use of a radioactive tracer. And you don't want to be injecting patients with a radioactive tracer unless you've got good reason to suspect that there might be something there. So a non-invasive medical imaging method that has the level of sensitivity of a PET system, but doesn't use radioactivity, instead using our biosafe magnetic particles, would actually be an improvement because we could potentially detect cancer early without any downside for the patient. So our first proof of principle is to identify metastatic spread of HER2 breast cancer. We've chosen this because we think it's the shortest path to commercial availability for a product. Today, patients who have been diagnosed with breast cancer, the first thing the doctor wants to know is, has it spread to the lymph nodes? Standard of care globally to do that is that we do a surgical excision of the lymph nodes or a biopsy of the lymph nodes. We go look in the petri dish, so to speak, and see if we find any tumor cells there. More than 50% of patients are node negative. This means the doc can go back to the patient and say, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is no metastatic spread. The bad news is I just cut your lymph nodes out to get you that answer. We found that to be really a problem. And if we could identify node negative patients from node positive patients non-invasively, we actually have a way to improve patient care. And this is what the FDA identified as being a breakthrough device. Their view was that if you could actually identify patients who are node negative and save them the surgical procedure, we've got a breakthrough for the way we're staging cancer. Of course, this is just the first step for us. If we've been able to show that we have a targetable nanoparticle that can be administered to patients safely and go and find and seek out the target tissue, we can now expand that into other forms of breast cancer other than HER2 breast cancer, for example, and move to other types of solid tumors such as lung cancer, ovarian cancer, and prostate cancer. So The use of magnetic nanoparticles as an imaging agent. We're starting with the first proof of principle with lymph nodal detection for HER2 breast cancer. But our business plan is to then extend that, once we've got that first proof of principle demonstrated, extend that into other forms of solid tumors. From a business model perspective, this makes a very compelling business opportunity because we have the classic sort of razor blade, or printer ink business model, where we have a proprietary piece of equipment, which is the platform for the detection, and we've got the injectable component, which is the cancer-specific test reagent. So for each different type of cancer, we'll have a unique nanoparticle formulation that's specific for that type of cancer. And our ability to monetize that, of course, is evident in that we can license the technology to a commercial partner. There are more than 40 companies that already make, sell, and service imaging equipment. Imagion's goal would be to partner with one of them to be able to bring the instrumentation into the marketplace. And then the real business is in the consumable stream, where you have a high gross margin consumable. And of course, then it's the consumable and the annual sales of the test reagent on the installed base of instruments that really drives the revenue model. So where are we from a product development perspective? We're just getting ready to start our first in human phase 1 study. We expect that study to start in the month of December. It'll be a multi-site study there in Australia, where we'll have maybe 3 up to 5 clinical sites. We're only going to test maybe 15 to 20 patients, so it'll be a relatively short-lived study, where we're trying to look for 2 basic things. One is primary endpoint being safety. Can we safely administer our particles to patients? Of course, we think that this is going to be relatively straightforward. There's a lot that's already known about the biological safety of iron oxide nanoparticles and the targeting antibody that we're using. We've done our toxicology studies that have been reviewed, and we've received the ethics committee approval for this. But nevertheless, a primary endpoint for our study will be the safety aspect for the injectable component. But the secondary endpoint is looking at the initial effectiveness for the detection technology itself. If administered to the patients, are we getting a good signal and being able to identify node negative from node positive patients? As I said, this is a relatively short study, and the idea being that based on the outcome of that study, that'll tell us whether we have any additional development work to do or whether we can move directly towards a larger pivotal study for commercial clearance. I like to think of our business as well beyond the diagnostic imaging space, however. There are a large variety of biomedical applications of iron oxide nanoparticles. So while today we're focused primarily on the diagnostic imaging and moving from breast cancer into other forms of cancer, we also are looking to establish strategic relationships with companies that might be interested in the use of our particle as an adjuvant, for example, for a vaccine or for a treatment as a drug carrier, or moving downstream into the use of the particles for screening blood samples, for example. So the investment rationale, I think, is really a strong proposition. We have clear commercial opportunity with our first product for the staging of breast cancer. We can then move into other forms of solid tumors for diagnosis. But ultimately, you can imagine that if we've demonstrated that we have a nanoparticle delivered to the site of the tumor and are able to detect it there, we've also demonstrated that we've got a valid drug delivery vehicle because we know the particles are there. A little bit on our capital structure and our finances. So we have no debt, 1 class of common stock. We have had a good share price appreciation over this past year. We had $8 million reported as of the quarter ended September 30th, but last week we announced that we had an additional $6 million raised in a placement. So we have working capital to get us through the through the current first in human study and set us up for development of the product line after that first in human data already. So where do I really see the investment highlights for this company? Clearly, we address large commercial market opportunities, and those are growing market opportunities. We have a unique technology that is patent protected and has advantages over the existing technology. Our commercial strategy, I think, is sound. We have an initial focus on near-term markets, but a long-term focus on the larger markets, and we're aiming to do that through strategic relationships rather than try to be a global player all by ourselves. And the printer ink revenue model allows us to monetize the technology that we have in a variety of ways. And we're right on the brink of our first in human data. As most investors in the healthcare space would know, human data is the linchpin to valuation for the company. So we believe that we're right on the edge of value inflection point for our company with a demonstration of our first human data set. Thank you for the opportunity to present. Looking forward to answering some questions.